Hello. I thought to talk about something today which is close to my heart, um, and which is often a source of some confusion. Um, Education. There's a huge row going on in education. It's a sort of undercurrent. It's not very obvious because people are unaware of the philosophical or attitudes which cause what seems to be a mental block, denying reason. Many people are perplexed about the way the current Labour politicians, although I would say that quite a few Tory ones suffer from this too, can't really get their mind around Catherine Birbalsingh. She is doing incredible work. If you look at the results from her highly disciplined school, and she's sufficiently famous for people to come from all over the world to see how she manages to do this. Children come out of her school from the poorest of backgrounds, with an education that people in the private sector struggle to achieve with their pupils. Now, this goes very much against the Labour Party belief, and I think the common belief, that the poor are oppressed and they're in a way doomed to fail unless everyone is put on the same equal, I should say, level or playing field. And then theoretically they believe that happiness and light will break out and a good education will be for all. Now, look, this sounds absolutely weird. I have a peculiar educational background in as far as that I didn't suit the private school system. I went through a very hard time in what we call prep schools. In the United States, a prep school is something slightly different. It's an education from about 7.5 to 8 years old through to about 12 to 13 years old before you go off to public school, which is equally confusing because public school in the United Kingdom means posh private school. I won't bother to explain. Anyway, in my after a few years at what they call public school, that was enough for me. So I went into a state finance school. It was a technical college, but it was, as it were, in the state sector, run by a local authority. And I loved it. The private schooling didn't do me much good, even though, in a way, it did rescue me somewhat. It was an ugly experience. Many children thrived in private schools and boarding schools. They had a happy time. But in my world, if you weren't good at sport and were academically backward or just didn't have the ability, it was a hard life. You were at the bottom of the heap. And that's where you stayed. So I have a certain sort of sympathy for people who think that, oh dear, these schools are not good for everyone. The truth is that a one-size-fits-all doesn't work for all. It's very hard, of course, to run a school that could tailor the education to each individual child. Administrative systems and teaching would be impossible if that was the case. So a degree of compromise is inevitable. But for instance, treating a potential bully or thug, and they do exist from a very young age, arguably that such fundamentals of character are at birth in some, in the same way as you treat a sensitive, introverted, and yet kind-natured child, is a disaster. If you treat the thug and bully like you would suit the other type of child, the thug and bully will run riot. And the cost and price of this a benighted idealism will be carried by all the other children. And that's a common thing. In some schools of education, teaching teachers some time ago in the 60s, teachers were actually taught how to use bullies to keep the class under control. That's how bad it was. Now the alternative is, if you then, which is, many of the private schools use this, you use a more thuggish type of disciplinary system to keep the thugs and bullies under control. Because the one thing they do understand, if anything else, is force. If they live their whole life by force, and in effect a will on their part to terrorise other children, then the only language they tend to understand is what they dish out to others. Now people say, oh, it's terrible. What makes them so bad in the first place is because they've been bruised and damaged by being rapped on the knuckles when they're little and so on. There's a bit of truth in that. But on the other hand, there are some who are really very nasty from a very young age, and I think from birth. It's in temperament. That doesn't mean to say you should dismiss them. You should do your best to get the best out of them. And that needs a different approach to discipline. And that's very difficult, of course, because the one-size-fits-all system, which is ideal for lazy administrators and of schools and lazy education ministers possibly, is so much easier. You just produce a simple booklet or set of rules and bingo, job done. All the teacher has to do is to follow tramline rules, and that does the job. Meanwhile, large sections of the, I'd say cohort, I hate the expression, large numbers of the children who aren't suited to that particular template of disciplinary procedure suffer. You give a sensitive, thoughtful child a severe clip for misbehaving. That does couldn't do a huge amount of damage. Could do a huge amount of damage. Whereas you give that to a thug, the thug will just, well, one of those things, isn't it? They'd almost wear their bruises with pride. And I know this because I've seen it in a private school I went to, where 11-year-olds regularly went in to get beaten by the headmaster, and they came out with pride. And in that queue, it's a queue outside his office, this was in the 60s, there was no shame in it. And in many cases, as I say, the thugs and bullies were quite proud about it. Did it hurt? Oh, never one admitted it hurt. Oh, he never did that. Whereas in other environments, that would be a badge of shame. And there'd be a lot of distress involved. But for the bully, water off a duck's back. Live by the sword, die by the sword. Of course, so conveniently wail about unfairness and so on and so forth. But other people, such people are pretty nasty. At my public school, there was one boy that was so bad that he became a boy soldier. They existed in those days. After his, what they call O-level, which I think was around about 15 or 16 years old, he had been such a thug and a bully that the school heaved him out. And he was one of the soldiers who went into the Iranian embassy siege and sorted that out. He was the sort of man, give me his due, he might have changed now, we all do change, but I would imagine he would be quite pleased to have an excuse in the name of patriotism and the country to kill people. That's the irony of this age, is that people who are particularly useful and will get medals in wartime, sometimes in peacetime, can be a great liability. It's very strange. This particular boy gave me a thorough beating. and for no good reason, except I think possibly because he wanted to maintain a status as being a thug and a bully, which meant he was a little king, because everyone else thought, there but for the grace of God go I. This is how thugs and bullies operate. It's they need victims to be able to remind everybody else around them that they need to toe the line, otherwise they'll go the same way. And that works in many cases like that. There are other types of thugs and bullies that use more of the mental approach. And I know it's the wrong thing to say, but women are more prone to that approach. In effect, do the same thing. They're sort of queen bees, queen wasps maybe in some cases. Anyway, in education, some of the most successful boarding schools are those that teach the children not just A-levels or stuff ready to get to university, but to teach them the rudiments of internal politics. That is, how to control our peer group, how to deal with things like setups, or how to arrange setups, how to frame people, and how to dominate groups of people by violence or even bribery, corruption, all sorts of things. And this is taught, in effect, at boarding schools, public schools in particular. Not all of them, but some are more prominent than this. And in my opinion, the absolute pinnacle of this education, which today, and it has been for well over 100 years, possibly 200 years, is at Eton. Now, they will sue me for saying this. My grandfather was bursar there, and I think it's two great uncles, were housemasters, or maybe one great uncle and an uncle. My uncle John was housemaster there, and another one was a teacher. He was known as Bloody Bill, a major figure. He died, I think, in the 60s, and he was known for generations. He was like a sort of landmark, and people thought in 40 years he hadn't changed at all. They knew him with some affection, I think, because he was what they call a character. In other words, a member of the awkward squad. Maybe I've inherited a bit of that. Anyway, Eton's a great place if you want your children to learn the basis of internal politics and how to get on in large corporations, and more significantly, how to get on at Westminster. People often say, terrible, the old Etonians, they got no place in Westminster. How could they dominate everything, this, that and the other? Well, it's because they had a first-class education in internal politics at their boarding school. Then they say, oh, they're scratching each other's backs and so on and so forth. Well, believe me, these old Etonians, when they were at Eton, were equally capable of destroying each other if it was convenient, or being very cruel to their own other Etonians. So no, it wasn't, oh look, there's an Etonian, we're going to pop him into the cabinet with other Etonians. Now, of course, they did belong to a particular caste, a ruling caste, C-A-S-T-E. But as an interesting point, old Etonians dominated Westminster for a long time, whereas Harrovians not so much, although Churchill was an Harrovian. It's because I think Eton was particularly good at teaching fundamentals of internal politics. That very expression is taboo. If you try and write about it, about internal politics, big corporations in particular, you won't get published. Not a cat's chance in hell. But if you talk to any senior manager who is honest, and there are a few of them, and directors, about the nature of politics, they will say, yeah, you've got to control it. You've got to know how to use it. And any senior manager or director of a big company who's not politically competent is a liability, because they're open to being set up, framed up, abused, manipulated, and so on and so forth. And this is why very often you find that people who are technically incompetent, or shall we say less competent, or even corrupt, get the good jobs because they have political skill. There's no point in putting in a technically competent person who's done great things at a more junior level into a more senior post if they don't have a political skill that goes with it. Essentially, internal politics is a neutral word. If you're good at it with the right attitude, you can see off other politicos that are trying to spoil things and just make things wretched and cause huge amounts of unnecessary stress for other employees. But a highly political person who is competent and only uses politics when the normal systems of communication and discipline can't deal with a difficult situation successfully, those people can transform the lives of people at work and make our companies vastly more productive and happier. But we're not allowed to talk about it because it's taboo. And it's taboo essentially because there are so many people in senior positions who got there by the abuse of internal politics, or who realise they're technically incompetent, and the only reason why they're there is because of their political skill. And so they feel any talk about it would strip away their credential justification for being in the position they've been elevated to. Yeah, it's complicated business. Education is complicated, and there's no doubt that Etonians come out with a very, very good foundation in the skills that make them at home in Westminster and at the heads of quite a few large corporations. That's still the case. But now you may notice at Westminster it's Oxford-educated people that are in there. And at Oxford, again, they get a similar education. They're very good. That institution is very good at educating internal politics. So people come out, as it were, ready for the cut and thrust, and often very, very nasty behaviour at Westminster. They can shrug it off, see it coming, so that anyone tries to set them up, they've seen them coming beforehand, and people quickly think, oh well, we better not muck around with that person. And that's excellent if you're trying to run, if you're a cabinet minister or what have you, because then other people in your party think twice before they leak anything, or try and make you look a fool, make you lose face. Loss of face in British politics is very big. Of course, if it's loss of face with people who don't like you, or the vast majority of the population who you already hold in contempt, they're not worried about that. It's loss of face from that peer group. Which brings me to Jason Arday. Arday is a phenomenon. First thing I should say is he is not to blame for what has happened. He was just trying to get on in the world best he knew. And if people were foolish enough to dance to his tune, why deny him? The failure is with a group of people who are all terrified of the opinion they have of each other. They are, as it were, a caste. And now, the problem with caste is if you want to leave your caste, i.e. break ranks, you will find that your caste will turn on you and will, with almost maniacal enthusiasm, try and destroy you. You see this with a lot of left-wing people. People people branch from ideological correctness, get it in the neck much worse than evil capitalists or people like me. People would sort of cheat to think that they have a mind of their own. I'm not certain if I have a mind of my own, but I'm trying my hardest. And they go them with bloodlust. It's apostasy for ideologues in the labour movement, and though we don't have it yet, if we had a fascist movement, apostasy is the ultimate crime. And in certain religions, apostasy is treated equally so when they've been taken over by ideologues. Religious ideologues are particularly poisonous. And yeah, they'll push you off the top of a building, or they'll string you up, or it's open season when it comes to dealing with apostates. The faithful, or the politically correct, the ideologically correct. I wouldn't say the faithful, because there is a glory in faith too, as well as danger. The ideologically correct will see you as worse than subhuman, see you as an excrescence, I think that's the word, a vermin. They'll dehumanise you and use animal words, and will feel quite happy to cut your throat, or behead you, or whatever. And the same with extreme ideologues in Soviet Russia, for instance, under Stalin, certainly in Mao's China and Pol Pot's world, and in North Korea. It's the same thing. Yes, left-wingers can be as violent and murderous as any right-winger. The left and right-wing authoritarian spectrum, when pushed, everyone on that spectrum, including so-called moderates, will make murder a moral duty in certain circumstances. That's how perverse things are. So Jason Arde, the situation is that his educational achievements, if you look at what he's written, I've read a bit of it, it's complete rubbish. It's up your arse intellectualism, where long words can be short, by the word. When I say long word in this case, it's a word with heavily loaded, which drags you into an ideological framework. And these ideological frameworks are enclosed systems. And there's no escape from a closed system, and evidence can't come in, because a closed system justifies itself, so it doesn't need any evidence. Birbalsingh. Many left-wingers loathe her to the bottom of their hearts. Here's a woman who employs super conventional teaching methods, and for an inexplicable reason for left-wingers. And she's churning out fantastic results from deprived children who, if you were to follow the oppressed belief, is impossible. Poor people must fail in a system that is not appropriately arranged to give them equality of results with the children of the wealthy, because after all they're oppressed, and by definition the oppressed cannot succeed. Along comes Birbalsingh, who uses the large chunk of the educational system associated with the oppressors, and these children, most of them are from ethnic, I say ethnic, that means non-white, it's very patronising, I'm sorry, backgrounds, are getting results that the ideology cannot tolerate. It's evidence that it's unwilling to consider, because it goes against what the ideology dictates, that these children must fail under those circumstances. So instead what they do is to deny the evidence. The evidence doesn't exist. Birbalsingh is blocking our creativity. She is an agent of the far right, because she has the cheek to do the impossible, in our view. So if it's not ideologically possible, it cannot be happening. So these poor children come out of our school with average educational results that exceed Eton, that school of internal politics. They come out from the most incredibly poor backgrounds, deprived, genuine economic oppression, and they're expected to do well, and they're disciplined to do well, and they do well. There's going to be one or two who won't. I understand that, because not everyone can get there. There are situations where people are genuinely incapable, but Birbalsingh seems to get the majority on a path towards higher education that the majority of private schools can't do. Now, if you look at it, you just look at this. The parents are paying, I don't know what, 30,000, 40,000 a year to send their children to private schools. I went to private school and in the 1960s, early 60s, and the annual fee was about, let me think now, it's £525 a term. I found an old invoice. So you do your sums, it was 1,000, whatever it was, £575. Now, multiply that by, what should we say, 10, maybe 15 times, and you get today's result. So that's going to be, what, 15,000, shall we say 22,000? I don't know, I'm doing my head. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of money then, and it's a lot of money now. And that school did something for me, because I started off there. Well, put it this way, if I was in the state system in those days, it is likely I could never have got through the 11 plus. And that meant I would have gone to secondary modern. And that's a sort of dumping ground. People were good with their hands. I find that really nauseating. It sort of dismisses the metamorphic, incredible ability to take raw materials, or very basic things like lumps of steel, what have you, with the help of lathes and other things good with your hands, and create maybe an engine. Okay, that's beyond secondary modern, but you see the point. Or create something beautiful out of wood. It's incredible. Instead, though, we were divided up in between, at the boarding schools, between sheep and goats also. Believe me, there was those who weren't particularly bright. In my case, I was educational subnormal. I sound like Arde, aren't I? It's a bit unnerving, isn't it? Education is subnormal. And I managed in the end to get what they call 5 A levels. In a time when if someone got 3 A grades at A levels, that was something quite exceptional. Really star stuff. Most people got B, C, D, and E. Well, I was a sort of B, C, D, E merchant, I got 5 A levels over 3 years, to be fair. Normally it took 2 years. But thanks to technical college, I did it in sciences and arts, which is a very rare thing to be done. And that changed my life, because I came out with a respect for the sciences and a basic understanding, very basic, as well as ditto the arts. And that changed my life. I went on to philosophy after that, partly for that reason. It was actually deliberate even then that I chose to take a little extra time to do the arts after rather poor performance, getting the sciences, a very low grade in physics A level, ditto chemistry. We got there in the end, but the other 3 were in the arts, which I did slightly better. So, back to our day again. Here's a symptom of tolerance of bad education. Because if you look at what he wrote, it is, well, quite frankly, I couldn't have written it, because it's actually very carefully arranged, the wording, to fit into the linguistic jargon and acceptable methods of expression of modern sociology. which is essentially closed system thinking. The terms used are highly loaded, and if you accept into your thought sufficient numbers of highly loaded bits of jargon that connect together, they form a sort of mental framework which controls your thinking. And then in matters moral, social and political, this control system in your thought, it's not your consciousness, in your thought, spits out opinions and attitudes and beliefs. Here's the thing, critical thing, independent of intervention of consciousness and criticism of consciousness. So in effect, you've got a sort of mini computer, as it were, programmed into your thinking based in the jargon and language, which creates a sort of civility, almost slavish attitude to the thoughts and beliefs often of long dead people who invented the jargon and philosophy. If you look at, for instance, Engels' Communist Confession of Faith, I think it's 20 or 30 principles or axioms, and if you were to follow those, then your whole moral and political approach is predetermined. You become partly robotic. Now, the strength of the ideologues is that vast numbers, most Labour MPs, already have those principles, or most of them, inside their heads, so they can act as one. It's very good for creating a sort of a political mob. So you just press a button and they'll all react in the same way. It removes individual judgment and, as it were, divorces character from what people actually do. It also strips people of their agency, because even though they're still capable of acting, what directs their action is not in effect generated by conscious decision and judgment, but by adherence to that what that sort of mini decision-making machine that's been inculcated into their thoughtfulness. Thoughts are not consciousness. Thoughts create consciousness. It's that way round, strangely. But their consciousness being that way created, they have a sort of almost suicidal loyalty to what's making them think, which is the ideology. And to an extent, they'll die for it. But they'll be very happy if they know of a choice of killing others to protect what enslaves them. So these people will slavishly fight for what enslaves them. It's a weird paradox, and they are quite disgusting and very sad. And you see quite a few Labour MPs, particularly ministers of education, and what you see when they're talking, they're not talking to you. It's the ideology talking. But because I think, hence I am, because the thoughts generate the consciousness, if you attack what's turning them into robots, really, who deny evidence, they denied our days, the evidence of our days, what do you call them? I was going to say political, our days, educational, in apostrophes, excellence, his plagiarism. They denied all that, because evidence isn't required by a closed system ideology. You can't talk to a machine. Well, you can, but you won't get anywhere. You can't have a sensible conversation with the machine. And this is why many Labour politicians, again, right-wing fascist Nazis were the same, but we don't have many of them, fortunately. No point talking to them. And this is why when Birbalsingh went to see the previous Labour Minister of Education, it was a complete waste of time. she might as well have been talking to an adding machine. Or, an early computer, the ones with the flashing lights. And the whirly discs went around like that, in the 1960s. And today, same thing. Complete waste of time. But the thing is that human beings reduced to such a pathetic state can be extraordinarily dangerous because they are immune to evidence. Consequently, they're incapable of engaging with change. And they're certainly incapable of flexibility. So they will go on with attempting to make the impossible possible until the authority is stripped away from them, even by circumstances when everything goes so wrong that nothing can be done. Or, if we have any democracy left, they are voted out never to come back again. So it's a grim situation, but coming back again to Birbalsingh, one of the reasons why she and the Labour Education Minister today and the previous one can't really talk to each other is because the Educational Minister is under the cosh, or under the cosh of the lie of educare. This comes up time and again when you're talking to lefties. And it's essentially a very primitive philosophical belief. It is extraordinarily primitive. And what they think is this theory was invented to try and get around the problem of solipsism. Well, how can I think anything's true? Because I'm subjective and the whole world could be an illusion. There's a sort of teenage, perplexity and uncertainty and, you're telling me this, that and the other. Well, I don't know, because it's all subjective. The whole world could be an illusion. I could be in a robotic fantasy. I could be one of Leibniz's monads, without extension. I could be reality, a bumblebee rather than a human being, but a bumblebee with the illusion of being a human being, and so it goes on. It's primitive stuff, but these sort of things were hugely philosophically interesting for centuries. And arguably, Plato was the first one who formalized the subjective-objective distinction, which I think is a waste of space. I think things are much more interesting than that. He created a problem to solve one. He invented a sort of world of forms, which was in some kind of Platonic heaven, God knows where, and the very clever clogs people capable of seeing these wonderful forms, the ideal table, the ideal chairs, the ideal tree, and so on and so forth. And so you could sort of understand reality by looking at something that sort of conforms to the ideal of a tree, the form. It's a tree. It's not a swimming pool, and it's not a chocolate sweetie. And this and the clever ones, the philosopher kings, knew about these things, and so they justified their status of being big bosses because they were frightfully clever, and being frightfully clever and highly educated gave them moral superiority. It makes my blood freeze. Because you've got a degree, you're morally superior to someone without. What planet are they on? Have they never come across an evil academic, a mad scientist? Yes, it's true. There's a very strong belief that education makes people morally superior, when it's utterly against the evidence to the contrary. And ignorance makes you inferior, and morally inferior. So, where does this Platonic heaven exist today? Because it does. Where else but inside the head of every child at birth? You inherit it. All the secrets of the world all its wonders, the ideals of trees, all goodness, understanding, all fundamentals of everything you like to think of is at birth inside a child's head. And the job of the teacher is not to inculcate tools of understanding, like the times tables, appreciation of poetry, aesthetic appreciation, learning other languages, learning the capitals of the world, learning mathematics, all these sort of things. And they certainly don't need discipline so they get things right, so they listen, so they understand, and they're given these tools to be able to get on in the world. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's the need to cater for different degrees of sensitivity, thoughtfulness, ability to learn, and so on and so forth in different children. No, I'm not doing that. What I am saying is the theory that children somehow, when they're being taught these fundamental tools, are having their creativity taken away from them, and the blocking, the coming out of these wonderful things which are already in their head. It's all rather weird. I mean, the idea that, for instance, appreciation of Virgil's Aeneid, I have to say Virgil's Aeneid because people don't know those sort of things. It reminds me of the sign I saw years ago near Ludlow Castle, where they have theatres, and it was advertising at the edge of the A49. It talked about Shakespeare's Hamlet. Well, a snob's laugh, of course. And I must admit, I did have a little giggle. I shouldn't have done. But the point is that it's to suggest that inculcating basic tools of understanding and appreciation of culture and communication, which is particularly critical, mathematics and so on and so forth, is blocking creativity, is to suggest that children do not need the tools of understanding. Adults don't need the tools of understanding, and they certainly don't need to know about their history, which is also horrible, because it might turn them into horrible people. And we can't have that, can we? And it's very primitive. I mean, the idea to suggest that, for instance, all about nature and, trees, bees, and so on and so forth, and understanding the scent of the wind before the rain comes, or being able to appreciate the emotion of someone where reason has gone out through the door, and handle that in a positive and sensible way, is already in your head, like a sort of, as if God had pre-programmed you before you were born. It's crackers. And it's another way of trying to solve the famous problem of solipsism. So here's a fundamental of philosophy, one of the great attempts to solve a philosophical problem. You could argue, in fact, all of Western philosophy is fixated on a non-problem. It's the problem of solipsism. I've written elsewhere how we can get around that, with the different rules of existence, depending upon whether you're talking about the intersubjective, the subjective, and the so-called objective. But let's not go there at this stage. This is too long-winded to talk about this now. We're dealing with a situation where Labour ministers are actually under the delusion that a good education, and a kind one, cannot include overt inculcation and teaching of the tools of understanding. That's pretty shocking. And they justify that because they say you've already got them inside you. So all you need to do, as it were, to get them out is to tickle children under the chin and be nice to them and ignore the fact that bullies will take that as weakness and then bully their siblings, or peers I should say, and wreck everything for them. oddly enough, in teachers' offices in the common rooms and so on and so forth, it's commonly known that one teacher will often spoil it for everybody else. So it happens not only amongst the children, but also, amongst the teachers. It's because it's a poor control of internal politics, from the teacher's point. As far as the children are concerned, it's today the bad education is largely caused by philosophical ignorance and worse, ideological inculcation in the idea, in this primitive idea of the lie of educare. It is a lie, even though it may be unintentional. In effect, it's a lie. There are a few who know it's a lie and they milk it because they deal with horrible right-wingers like that. And so, let's push that a bit further. So Jason Arday, I think, is a tragic figure. And he has been treated very, 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 very badly. Even though he appeared, and I wrote this earlier on, to play the caste, the manipulative caste, like a violin. When push comes to shove, they encouraged him to do that. It's quite disgusting. I personally think, and it's a terrible thing to say, one of the big universities needs to be, if not closed, it needs to be really have a shot across its bows. It won't happen. But Cambridge has made itself look very, very, very stupid. It's tragic. Not least for all the students who worked their guts out to get their degrees, and for all the great people who've been to Cambridge. But it's actually quite ironic, because Cambridge fostered what caused all this. Earl Russell invited Wittgenstein to Cambridge. Wittgenstein never got an academic degree. Never. Yet he's been promoted as a sort of god of philosophy. And he was the one who is responsible for the systematic destruction of philosophy, to the extent that the cultural relativism popular today, which in effect is disrespects all cultures, because if all cultures are the same, then they're all as good or as bad, as useless as each other. It's a bit weird, isn't it? The reason why many academics try and dismiss English culture as not existing at all is because if it does exist as a culture, then all other cultures are equal to it. So the oppressor and oppressed theory has a problem, because everyone's oppressed, or everyone's an oppressor, whichever way. So it's quite complicated. But the simple thing, coming back to Birbalsingh and the Minister of Education, is that Birbalsingh is not an ideologue. She focuses on getting results. Of course, the ideologues will say, of course she's an ideologue, but she doesn't work on a system of axioms. She will state need for discipline and certainty, and very keen on branding things and so on and so forth. But her main aim is results. And if the aim is to give super good educational results from people who would otherwise be considered doomed to be at the bottom of the heap or underneath the bottom, the untouchable caste, forever to be there and to be pitied by bien-pensant, luxury-believing, left-wing ideologues in this case. But again, I must emphasise, it could happen in the right-wing world too. There's no difference between the two. Because essentially they're authoritarian either way you go. It's just they use different excuses for authoritarianism, and different flags and jargon and methods of manipulation. But underneath it all, it's just a matter of crushing agency of individuals and then pretending that agency can rightly be transferred to an abstraction called the state. When abstractions have no agency by definition, because they have no physical presence and no consciousness. Instead, the reality, the people who really have the power, are those who peddle the ideology. So it really is a matter of usurping the agency of millions of people and then illicitly transferring that agency to a few people with red or black rosettes. That's really what it comes down to. Which goes back, of course, to Orwell and O'Brien torturing Winston and O'Brien. So the difference between Nazis and communists is nothing. They're just in it for power. Power is power, is the quotation from there. Even that's not right, actually. It's really then it for authority. They think authority gives them power, because in reality, all authoritarianism is doomed, because it actually destroys information flow, and you need information combined with authority to metamorphose into political and social power. So what O'Brien should have said, rather than what he deludedly said, is authority is authority. But the A word is taboo, so we're not really allowed to talk about that. Rather like internal politics, talking about it is taboo. These sort of hang-ups need to be, we need to get rid of them. So Birbalsingh is a classic example of left-wing ideologues unwilling, incapable of addressing evidence, and also left-wingers who put their ideology ahead of the education and future of those who they purport to be fighting for, when they're not. What they're really fighting for is the ideology, not people, not humanity. And that's the essential inhumanity of a current government, and is the essential inhumanity of all right-wing governments. Because the only system that's acceptable is a system that exists to find out what to do and not to force ideological delusion, which can cause death, misery to millions onto the country. So, next time you hear that minister talking about creativity and this sort of stuff, yes, creativity is important, but you cannot be creative until you have the ability to do certain fundamental things. That's the point. Because without that, you can have all the sensitivity and creativity in the world, and you will be crushed. There's talk about crushing a butterfly. It's tragic. And we have 1 million butterflies being crushed now by ideologues in education. Children who are being reduced to the inability to exercise their own agency because somehow the ideological theory says, oh, educare. We can't let these little butterflies learn about how to understand things, how to get on in the world, how to add up. It goes to the extent that in mathematics, oh no, you've got to decolonize mathematics, which means destroy it. And you destroy people's futures like that. It's wretched. And we are in the grip of politicians who genuinely believe this. I was going to use a rude word about sharp, because it's almost beyond swearing at. All well-meaning, the road to hell is paved with good intentions and so on and so forth. So Birbalsingh's doing something right. children are coming out from our place who can get on in the world. And the children at countless other schools who are being patronised and being taught how wrong and evil this country is, and how, and in effect, stripping children of the civilization and the culture which is essential to be able to exert their agency to get on in the world. This has got to stop. It will. Anyway, thanks for that. I've been rambling a bit, but I think it's worthwhile because our day has brought up something very important. He was just a lad trying to get on, and people taking snipes at him. No, he should never have been allowed to get so far. When you're surrounded by fawning academics, oh, you're the best thing ever. Oh, we're so proud. We're so lucky to have you. God help us. The people who behave like that need to be fired, because for all our good intentions, they're a curse on society. And to an extent, this is a terrible thing, they're a curse on humanity. They should be treated kindly, of course, after they're fired. They shouldn't be harried or chased or victimised or anything. But we can't carry people like that. They're abusing our positions, and that because they're locked in this caste where they're all terrified of each other. It's a bad scene. They need liberating. They need to be, as it were, their minds need to be decolonised of the ideology making them servile. Oh, that's it. Bye for now.